Thank you for sitting down once again for Behind the Final Call cover story. We into over 20 episodes of this series, and of course we've had a few bumps in the road. By Law's permission, we're gonna keep it going, but of course this week is March 26th. Volume 38, number 25 is what's on the paper, and the cover story is White Backlash Worldwide. Why this cover story?
Well, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me. I mean, it's always a pleasure and honor, and I think it's important to be here to have these discussions. So this week's cover, White Backlash Worldwide, is based on the shootings that occurred in New Zealand that the world primarily found out about on March 15th. At least 50 Muslims murdered in 2 mosques. At least 50 people injured as of the latest figures that I'd heard about. But the man who did the shooting, allegedly, Brendan Tarrant, white man from Australia, a self-declared race warrior who was in New Zealand. He said he has been plotting these attacks for 2 years. He was in New Zealand training, and by these attacks, plotting to kill Muslims very explicitly for 2 years. He says he was training in New Zealand and decided, hey, this is just as good a place as any to carry out this murderous attack. And so he went into the 2 mosques, literally slaughtered unarmed people. He was eventually confronted by a young Muslim male, dropped his weapon, ran. He was eventually apprehended by the police, and he now faces murder charges in New Zealand. But we felt this was important because this is one of a number of threats and actual murders that have happened in recent years. So this man, 28 years old, out of Australia, he pays homage to Dylan Roof as a killer of non-black folks in South Carolina in 2015. He pays homage to a white killer who slaughtered about 70 people in Norway a few years ago. He pays homage to another killer who slaughtered Muslims in a mosque in Canada, and others. So he released a manifesto, which is basically his very reasoned explanation for what he's doing. And I would say, if you have the opportunity, look it up and read it for yourself. Don't accept this characterization that he's some kind of loser, madman that didn't know what he was doing. You may not condone what he was doing. You may not agree with what he did. You may not like what he did, but he was very clear on what his intentions were. He was very clear on why he did what he did. And he's very, very clear on the need for the white world to rise up and to push Muslims in particular out of Europe. He calls Muslims and those who are non-white invaders. But the other thing about this is not a sentiment limited to him. We already talked about these other racial attacks by avowed race warriors. These are not people that were dubious about who they were and who they were after. So we wanted to bring this to the attention, and we wanted to kind of expand it, pull the lens back so that people could see this is all interconnected. So it's part of what we call a global, growing, and deadly white resentment. So we hope that people will take the time. We got 2 different articles. We hope that people will take the time to read both.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And actually we have 3 if we include the
editorial.
The editorial. Yeah. So of course, we are seeing these attacks that are occurring and increasingly, and sometimes it's interesting that we don't always know if it's necessarily increases, that we're just seeing it more in the media.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me that 2 out of the last 4 weeks, or 2 out of the last 4 covers of the Final Call have been related to this issue of white males, self-described and committed race warriors. So we had this edition a few weeks back, which this is a Coast Guardsman, U.S. Coast Guardsman, was arrested and accused of plotting a deadly attacks against blacks and others inside America. And we pointed out how this white supremacist problem is a problem in the U.S. military, because these people see themselves as race warriors. And from Dylan Roof to Brandon Tarrant to others, their desire is to spark a race war. So that's a couple weeks ago. And then we have this edition of the paper, which is not a plot or a plan, but the actual execution. So we say these things are rising, along with a particular brand of politics. If you look at the editorial, I talk about a sliding scale for white supremacy. So you may have on the one end people like Mr. Tarrant who say we're just going to kill Muslims and non-white folks outright. That's one end of the scale. That might not be the place that the respectable white politics say are acceptable. So that may be out of bounds. But on the other end of the scale, you got Jeanine Pirro, a host for Fox News, that accused a Muslim congresswoman of being anti-American and maybe pro-Sharia because she wore hijab. So she's questioning this congresswoman out of Minnesota's allegiance to America, her loyalties, and really is describing her as the other. President Donald Trump, the day after these tragedies, was in the Oval Office, well, not in the Oval Office, but in the White House, and he was talking about some legislation that he was going to veto, dealing with his wall, right? And, or really the legislation deals with a lack of support for him moving money to pay for this wall with Mexico. In that meeting, the Trump uses the same similar language that this man who killed 50 people in New Zealand used, talking about invaders, talking about criminals, talking about the threat to America. So this is a growing threat, and it's not one that we think is likely to be alleviated or to slow down, because it is tied to a politics, even though the respectable ones may say we don't want the murder, but they want other things, like Mr. Trump's wall. They want folks that are questions about, for example, in Europe, can Muslims and Africans and others fit into the European context and be Europeans? There are questions about European identity and white identity. Then there's questions about how these people should be handled, how immigration should be handled, and then you have the over-policing of these groups in America as well as in Europe, and you have the rise of right-wing parties that are espousing a kind of white identity politics. Mr. Trump represents a type of white identity politics that is appealing to millions of Americans. And so the man that is accused of these murders in New Zealand claimed Trump as one of his heroes when it comes to white identity and being part of a broader cause. So we need to pay very close attention to what's happening in the world. Lastly, these groups, even though they're armed and dangerous and have a history of violence, in particular in the U.S., have not been targeted by law enforcement. Have not been targeted. Because there's always a fear of offending white sensibility. There's a recognition that white men have a right to be angry. White men have a right to their guns, and white men have a right to express their discontent. So there's a whole area of acceptable white behavior, even when it comes to pointing guns at federal authorities, which happened at the Bundy Ranch a few years ago in Nevada. All of that is talked about in my editorial. My point is, along this sliding scale of white supremacy, there's the outright murder, which is condemned, but the neglect, the over-policing, the suppression, the denial of rights is very much a part of regular, respectable white politics in America and in Europe.
Yes, sir. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, of course, we know that there's always attacks, and of course, we are perceived as the hate group in many instances, the Nation of Islam.
Well, yes, they would like to.
Those
they would
who
like
would be
to
perceived as those who are violent. And to my knowledge and recollection, I don't recall there ever being any instances where the Nation of Islam was involved with doing some mass shootings or blowing up some buildings or running around doing any of these things that the nation has been accused of, or even any demonstration of impacting the lives of groups of people in a negative manner because of hate. So we have activists who are defending the local mosque in Milwaukee against hate charges, and the community really coming together. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So actually on pages 4 and 5, we have two major stories that are related. Both are linked to the Southern Poverty Law Center. So the Southern Poverty Law Center puts out a report, and it talks about extremists and racists and threats. Well, in that report, they named the Nation of Islam. And so as that report was broken out, our local mosque in mine was named as a hate group, and they fought back. They had a press conference, brought out members of the community, and people that were able to bear witness to what they have done, continue to do, how they partner to actually bring light, life, and power into the community, how they work with young people, how they work to try to increase peace, and how they work to uplift our people. So this is us fighting back that false charge. But at the same time, the Southern Poverty Law Center itself fired its co-founder, Morris Dees, and now faces charges of racism, sexism, and opportunism. So this group, which has been around since the 70s, Southern Poverty Law Center made its claim to fame by winning a case against the KKK after a young black man was found hung. They won the case and won a pretty good judgment for his family. But there are those who say that today the group has gone too far, in particular naming the Nation of Islam as a hate organization. So recently, Mr. Morris Dees, who is the co-founder, was fired. There was no explanation about why he was fired. Then the group announced that it would be looking at its internal operations and the problems. Well, there was no admission from the group officially what those problems were, but according to news reports that we've been able to uncover, and according to past reports, there are concerns that within the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is supposed to be about rights for all, fairness, justice, and equity, that there are concerns at minimum and at worst problems when it comes to racism, sexism, and this organization using, or in a sense, peddling or pimping fear and hatred to raise money. The group has almost $500 billion right now. It raised about over $100 million, I think, last year, or maybe in 2017. But it has now about $500 million in assets. Mr. Dees was being paid $375,181, and he was paid an additional nearly $42,000. Richard Cohen, who is the president of the Southern Poverty Law Center, was paid about $365,000, and he received additional compensation of about $43,000. So one of the things that happened recently was a black female attorney left the organization and complained, or at least expressed concern, according to media reports, about how the organization treated women and blacks. And these kind of charges actually go back to the 1990s, even though The Southern Poverty Law Center has denied that any of these things are true. So someone connected with the Obamas now is coming in apparently to kind of review the operation and recommend some changes. We plan on reporting more about that next week, but you can get this initial report at finalcall.com.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We want to move on to another positive note. And that's the article that follows right up under there, which is dealing with our brothers in Houston and the Peace Rise, promoting unity in the community of Houston. Can you give us a little bit about that story?
Well, this is again in Houston under the leadership of Dr. Abdul Halim Muhammad, one of the great ministers in the Nation of Islam, along with community partners, the rapper Paul Wall, as well as other activists, other groups, local radio personality, and media folks, to have a day devoted to promoting peace. So, you know, they brought out cars and vans and all these different things that could attract people's attention. But the theme was peace, unity, and progress. So this ability to galvanize people around the themes of peace in our neighborhoods, being able to galvanize people around self-determination, self-development, self-policing. This is the work of the nation. This is what Dr. Abdul Halim Muhammad was connected with in conjunction with other activist groups and organizations in Houston. And this is the work that we do, a very uplifting, building, unifying work, and we're proud to be able to showcase it this week in the Final Call.
Thank you. I'm jumping over, and not because it's not important, but looking at big banks leaving poor neighborhoods. And of course, I didn't get a chance to read the entire article, but some of that is self-explanatory that, you know, the economy in our neighborhoods is important. And of course, when you will find in many instances that we have cash stations or currency exchanges in many instances in our neighborhoods and not banks, which are lending, also potentially lending institutions. Can you talk a little bit about this article and the significance of it as it relates to the community?
According to this report, there's now this trend of these major banks pulling out of poor neighborhoods. So JP Morgan Chase, which is the country's biggest bank, had announced plans to open up 400 different branches and expand. So these are offices, businesses directly in communities. But they turned around and they have applied to open another 185 new branches, but 71% of them are in affluent areas, right? And this is just one bank. This is just JP Morgan Chase.
Right.
And they now have an intention to shut down 187 branches. Well, what does that mean? Well, ideally, a bank partners with community. It supports businesses, it supports homeowners, it supports organizations. It is part of the health of a community through its lending. It may provide grants. It may provide assistance to local organizations. So when you don't have a branch, but as you said, you got an ATM, that doesn't give you an opportunity to build a relationship. That doesn't give you an opportunity to get funding for your business, your organization, and to try to link the local economy of your neighborhood to an institution that can help support that economy. So this is very important. We say again, perhaps even in these negatives, there's a possibility of a positive.
That's right.
Perhaps in some of these instances, we can pool our own resources. Open credit unions or black banks can come in and fill the void. But what it means is we got to sit together and work out a strategy. We got to be a little bit more disciplined in what we do with our money and in how we strategically use over $1 trillion that we get every year out of this economy. It doesn't mean you're going to spend every dollar with black folks, but imagine if you could spend 10% of your income. 10% of $1 trillion is like $1 billion. So imagine what $1 billion in new investment, new business looks like in our neighborhood. So again, we need to kind of look at this piece and see what's happening. And it again says to us, in my view, we've got to do something for ourselves.
Yes, sir. And it's beautiful that it's listed that there are the top 5 black banks are listed in the paper, and there are only 19 black-owned banks, and that was reported as October of 2018.
Yeah.
So that same spirit, of course, we know that the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad told us that separation is the best and only solution, and that starts with us, of course, building institutions. We know that as this world falls, that we have to make sure that we're bringing something up to replace it. So,
I mean, and the reality is we are segregated, which means that we are a part from the mainstream, but we are in an inferior position.
right.
So we have to understand, I mean, the things that come to my mind is, so what kind of reality are we going to live under? This segregated reality where we have an inferior status, or a separate reality where we have decided we are going to take control and build a future for ourselves. It's kind of like in a marriage. If it doesn't work, you get a separation, you ultimately get a divorce. So we got to understand what these things mean, and I think we got to look at the current reality and ask ourselves, are we being integrated and brought into the society? Or are we finding it increasingly difficult for us to get a toehold and finding a lot of animosity? Whether you're talking about police officers, whether you're talking about jobs, whether you're talking about education, whether you're talking about any of these levers of progress, it seems to be more and more difficult for us to grab hold, and there seems to be a really ugly, foul spirit in the country, which reflects the president, but not just the president, but the millions who openly support him and those who tacitly support him. So in that environment, and in light of that reality, the question for us is, what are we going to do?
That's right. That's right. And the reality is that even though we know that there's individuals who have contributed and helped to shape an environment that our reality is what it is that we have to take responsibility for our reality. And if our reality is going to change, it's going to be because we change it.
Well, if nobody's coming to save you, guess what you need to do? You need to save yourself.
That's right.
You need to save yourself. So I think we need to spend more time focused on our ability to save ourselves. And that is not only in line with the divine time that we're in Scripture, but you feel empowered. When you are taking control of your own life, your own destiny, you're working for something. But if you're always waiting for somebody to do something for you, you know, you are really in the mindset of a modern slave. So we have to reject that mentality. And I think as we grow and as we become more and more stronger, what's good for us and our development is actually good for this country. It means more people in productive activity. If we are growing and spending money, we have to begin, but we got to spend some of it with them until we can fulfill all of our needs. So rather than plotting against us, why don't you help us, or a minimum, why don't you get out the way? Because we believe and we have been taught that we're going to be successful regardless. But it starts with us understanding the time and coming together out of necessity before we're forced to come together because we absolutely have no choice.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And of course, we can go to an international article and story that's going on, and many people are semi-aware at minimum of what's taking place in Venezuela. And of course, the United States wants to go help. But as we just talked about, that there are people right in the borders of the United States that are suffering, that they're not as interested in helping, but they want to go help internationally. Yeah. Can you give us a little bit about what's going on?
Well, again, you can get this at finalcall.com. There was a demonstration this past weekend in Washington, D.C., hands off Venezuela, with people who are saying they don't like the tone and the tenor of U.S. talk. They don't like the president talking about all options being on the table. They don't like the hints that there could be a military invasion. And they want self-determination for the Venezuelan people. They want the U.S. to leave these people alone and let them resolve their own problems.
Yes, sir.
And part of the problems is sanctions that the U.S. has imposed on Venezuela. So again, check out the article at finalcall.com or get your digital subscription. You know, and stop by the foodie spot right here at 7350 South Stony Island Avenue and pick up your copy of The Final Call and stay informed.
Yes, sir. And of course, we're told that knowledge is power, but it's not just any knowledge, not any information. It's having the right knowledge at the right time that guides us to do and know what we should be doing in that particular time. And of course, during Savior's Day, a beautiful book was released. Part 2 of the Teachings 2.0 was made available from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Can you tell those who may not be aware of the Teachings 2.0 exactly what that book is and why they should get it?
Minister Farrakhan has literally answered thousands of questions on Twitter. So these books, and this part 2 is kind of a compilation of these questions and answers in very, if I could put it this way, profound answers. So if you're looking for wisdom, you're looking for guidance, if you're wondering, how can I improve myself, my family, and our community? Well, here's a man who has been giving us so much information. And we have the opportunity now to get this little book and to read his words. And I mean, it's really fascinating. You can get it at store.finalcall.com. But the Teachings 2.0, the Twitter sayings of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So I mean, this is a pretty powerful thing, and we hope you'll get the book, and we hope that you will put it to use in your life to get benefit for yourself. That's the whole point of the wisdom, the truth, and the understanding that we've been given. It is about improving your own life. And as you improve your life, now you put yourself on the road to improving your family, your neighborhood, your community, your city, and the world.
That sounds like a course of study that I'm always interested, of course, on Friday evenings. If those who are by a study group or mosque in the area, you want to always make sure that you come and visit the study course designed by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, Self-Improvement, the Basis for Community Development.
Well, what do you think about that?
Hey, I'm always a shameless, without a doubt, plug that not only empowers each individual, but of course empowers our community. And I'm going to jump on that same note, and actually I was looking for that one right there, is that of course we know that knowledge is power, but the right knowledge, and of course we know the book Teachings 2.0 is available, but there's something that's been going on and will continue to go on, by Allah's permission, the rest of this week. Can you talk about what's going on in the Final Call building right now?
At the Final Call Administration building, located at 734 West 79th Street, here in the beautiful city of Chicago. From this past weekend we had a beautiful open house. I mean, DVDs, CDs, posters, books, prayer rugs. I mean, an incredible amount of knowledge displayed, and you can actually come this week between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then this Saturday, March 23rd, from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. and you can browse and see the books and the DVDs and the CDs and t-shirts and a hat like this one that I got right here. I bought there. Actually, I got a t-shirt on, but I guess I shouldn't take my clothes off and show it to you.
No, don't.
But
not this time.
Not this time. Okay. But anyway, come on by the Final Call. Stop in. Great prices. Great prices. We're almost giving away this information. But as I looked, and we got pictures in this week's edition of the Final Call, so you need to just take a look. Just an incredible amount of knowledge, and it's all ours. Very cheap. You can't afford not to go.
That's right. Thank you. And of course, I took the book Fallen as a sign that it's like, don't forget me. Of course, we have a beautiful book by the editor of the Final Call newspaper, which is Dope Busters, Farrakhan Fanatics or Saviors, the true story of the DC crack cocaine crisis and successful Muslim anti-drug patrol. We're not going to pass up the opportunity to give our people who may not already know about and have not had the opportunity to tune in to know what's going on?
Well, you know, one day we'll do something, and we'll maybe focus on this specifically. This is my first book. It is about the Muslim anti-drug patrols of late 1980s in Washington, D.C., the first patrol that shut down an open-air drug market. It's a very fascinating story, inspiring story, and a story that shows black men in a rather heroic light, even though I don't think any of us who went into Mayfair Mansion's apartment complex at the time saw ourselves as heroes. We just saw ourselves as those, the community that come and asked us for help. People were literally like prisoners in their own homes. Children couldn't come out to play. There was gunplay day and night. There was massive drugs. It was like, one lady said, if you didn't know any better, you would think there was some kind of 24-hour event happening at this apartment complex 7 days a week. So it was probably, it was definitely the largest open-air drug market in the District of Columbia at the height of the crack cocaine crisis, and one of the biggest open-air drug markets on the East Coast. So it was one of the biggest in the country, generating millions of dollars in sales, along with tons and tons of misery and death. So this story is about the patrols and what motivated the brothers to get involved, and something of their stories, something about the climate at the time. So you can go to richardmuhammad.com, and if you want to order it, or you can find me on Facebook, or you can contact me through Twitter, and we'd be happy to get you a copy.
Yes, sir. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm not going to hold us. Of course, there's tons in there. Of course, we always want to make sure that you visit social media and look up Final Call on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, of course, the YouTube channel. And also, please support the Collective 9. Visit plenty of content that will help expand and open your mind, and get your digital edition of the paper. You can get the paper version. We want you to support that. But, man, there's so many features in the digital edition. You can have it read it to you. You can, I mean, it's tons. You want to check it out. Brother Richard, close us out.
Well, again, this is the 40th anniversary year for the Final Call. Stay tuned for that. Got some great things planned. That's why you need to stay tuned to this show, so you don't miss it and miss out. And, you know, but just stay tuned. Keep on spreading this word. Like the show. Sign up so you can get the alerts. Come on down to the foodie spot, 7350 South Stony Island Avenue in the beautiful South Shore neighborhood here in Chicago. Get some good food, good people, good atmosphere. And just keep informed, brothers and sisters. Stay awake in this hour. And we're trying to give you good information and present it in a way that is palatable and pleasant. Even if the news is not always pleasant, we like to try to present it to you in a way that you can accept it, learn from it, and benefit from it.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you once again. Until next time, assalamu alaikum. We look forward to seeing you in the virtual world again. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, sir.